Hi, and welcome back to the Short Vol Show Live. My name is David. I wanted to talk today a little bit about some options misconceptions, plus answer viewer comments, plus talk about some other stuff. So stay tuned with me as the Short Vol Show Live starts right now on YouTube. All right, so thanks everybody for watching and tuning in. I'm not sure how loud that music sounds to you, but it sounds pretty loud to me. So let me turn it down slightly. All right, so yeah, I got a lot of good response from the last video talking about how some guy lost a bunch of money on a trade that was supposed to have no risk, and I know that scared a few people. You know, in the trading business, we are in the business of A, taking risk, and B, though most of all, managing risk. And so it's very important that you manage your risk when you're trading. Any trade that you go into, you want to think to yourself and you want to analyze and have an answer for what's the worst thing that can happen. And this is usually a mathematical answer because most things with options and trading are quantifiable. So what we would do trading in the as a market maker is we would look for what would happen to us in a 50% move to the upside or a 50% move to the downside in a stock, and how much money would we make or lose, and we would limit that risk to a certain amount. And what we would have is we would have paper sheets back then. And on the bottom of the paper sheets, it would show how much you make or lose. On the left side would be the downside, and the right side would be the upside, how much you would make or lose for a 10%, 20%, 50%, or 80% move in the underlying security. And now, of course, that doesn't account for things like hard-to-borrow issues and assignment risks. There's all kinds of risks with options, and as long as you understand the risks, then you can go into it with open eyes. I did get a viewer question saying, you know, what do I think about selling naked options? Is it too risky, et cetera, et cetera? And I personally am completely comfortable with selling naked options. However, I'm going to make a risk analysis and say, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because if you're in this business long enough, the worst thing that can happen does happen, and it happens more times than you think it would. So you need to plan for that sort of thing. And the good news with options is that you can account for the worst thing that could happen, and you can be prepared for that so that you can sleep at night. So yes, I think selling naked options is fine, but you need to know what kind of risk you are putting yourself in, and you need to be comfortable with that. If you have a $10,000 trading account, how much are you really comfortable with losing? Are you comfortable with losing $5,000 of that? Or if you lose $500, are you going to panic and cover your position? A lot of trading is just knowing yourself and how you react to things. And some of that is just going to take experience on your part. I did want to comment just briefly on selling options and how it sort of works. If I go into the open market and I sell 5 calls to somebody, obviously there's some specific person on the other side that's buying the 5 calls from me. So let's say I go out in the open market and I sell 5 calls. And let's say that the actual guy who bought those 5 calls from me, for whatever reason, decides that he is going to exercise them. He's going to say, I'm going to turn those calls in, and I'm going to trade them in for stock, which is my right owning the calls. Well, if he is the only one who exercises the calls out of the whole open interest in the calls, let's say that the open interest is 10,000. 10,000 people have traded these options, and this is the only guy that exercises his calls. As I pull up the screen behind me, you can kind of see the open interest. This is not a very liquid stock, but let's pull up Apple, okay? And you can see the open interest on different strikes. For example, here are, if we look at the February 60 calls, or the February 160 calls, open interest is 27,000. 6,000 have traded today, for example. Get out of the way. You can see that off to my left. So let's say I sold somebody 5 calls in Apple, and he decides out of all the people that own those calls that he's going to exercise 5 of them. Well, the likelihood is that I'm not going to get assigned on any of those 5 calls, because what happens is as soon as the trade clears, or as soon as the trade is made, those 5 calls go into the overall open interest for that strike. And if, let's say, the open interest is 10,000 and 1/10 of the overall amount of calls that are in that open interest are exercised, then I will probably get assigned on 1/10 of the calls that I'm short. But if the open interest is 10,000 and just one guy exercises his 5 calls, it's very unlikely, even if I was this exact person who sold that guy the calls, it's very unlikely that I'm going to get assigned on any of those calls. That's just not the way it works. And the reason I know this is from trading calls for dividend. We had something. There's something called skating on the dividend, and what we would do is we would try to be short calls in a strike where people would generally exercise their calls to capture a dividend. Now, what is that all about? Well, exercising calls to capture a dividend is if you own a call in a stock and the dividend is about to be paid, then you might want to turn your calls into the actual stock so that you can get paid the dividend, because calls don't get a dividend, only the actual stock does. So right before the ex-dividend date, people will exercise deep calls if the dividend is significant so that they can capture that dividend. Now, on the other side of that is if I sell a bunch of these calls that should be exercised, and I don't know how much it happens these days or not, but inevitably a certain percentage of the people who should be exercising their calls to capture the dividend either forget to, aren't paying attention, and they don't do it for some reason. So if there is an open interest, and there's certain stocks that traditionally had a decent-sized dividend that people would forget to exercise their calls in. One of them I remember doing was shearing plow. And so many times we would do these spreads so that, and the spread is basically worthless except for the fact that it exposes you to being short these calls. And you hope that if you sell 100 calls, you're short 100 calls in the strike, that maybe 5 of them, somebody will forget to exercise their calls, and out of the 100 calls, 5 of them it's called skating on them. You'll skate on them, and the person will not exercise them to collect the dividend. And just based on the fact that they forget to do that, you end up getting free money in the form of the dividend because they forgot to exercise their calls. So from that process of trying to skate on dividends, I'm well aware of how call assignment happens. The second point I wanted to make is that just because this guy had this box trade where he lost a bunch of money, that should not make you fearful to do something like buy a call vertical, thinking that, oh no, well, one side of my call vertical might get assigned, and therefore there's this hidden risk in this trade, and I might be in big trouble. I know if you buy a call vertical, essentially the most you can lose is what you pay for the vertical. Now, there is an overall chance that for some weird reason somebody would exercise that out of the money call. But in general, that never happens. So, for example, if we have Apple and you buy the 160, 170 call vertical, let's say stock's 157 now. You buy the 160, 170 call vertical. So you're long the 160 call, you're short the 170 call. If somebody were to exercise the 170 call, that would be saying that they want to buy the stock for basically $13 higher than it's trading now. And they're going to make you sell the stock to them at 170 when stock is 157. Plus, it also means that they're going to lose the premium, whatever they paid for the call. So for somebody to do that would be very foolhardy, and in fact, it would be a boon for you because you're getting to, well, it basically would be a boon for you. And so it's just not going to happen. So I would not be fearful about buying a call vertical and getting assigned on a 170 call, because it just doesn't make sense that somebody would want to pay 170 for the stock when the stock is 157. You see what I'm saying? The only time that there is a slight risk with being assigned on a call is when the call is very deep in the money. So if you were to trade, let's go back to Apple again, if for some strange reason you were to trade the 100, 110 call vertical, there is a slight possibility that you would get assigned on your 110 calls, but that's because they're way deep in the money. That trade is not one that anyone would really be putting on. You wouldn't be trading a call vertical that's that deep in the money. But that's the only chance. The only time you have a chance of being assigned on a call is when it's very deep in the money, or when there's a dividend being declared. So don't be fearful of trading call verticals, and don't be too fearful of trading naked options, because it's all about managing risk. And yes, you have to take risk in the market. There's risk in life. There's risk in the market. It's all about taking smart risks and managing them. Okay, I wanted to go to a trade question that a user had, and it was about selling stock and buying a call. So it's kind of the opposite of a covered call. It would be shorting a stock and buying a call. And let me see if I can pull up the trade. But basically, let's take the example of Apple. If I were to sell Apple for 157 and buy the 160 call, if you buy a call and you sell stock 1-to-1 against it. So if you buy one call and you sell 100 shares of stock against it, which is the trade that we were talking about here, that is a synthetic put. So you're doing the same thing as buying if you buy the 160 call and you sell Apple 1-to-1 against it, you're doing the same thing as buying the 160 put. Now, the example the person was giving was actually in UVXY. So let me pull up the trade we were talking about on this one. And essentially, once again, UVXY, I don't know why I keep saying essentially. UVXY is hard to borrow. We were talking about that last week. So if you're selling UVXY stock and buying a call, you're opening up a can of worms for yourself. Yes, that is equal to buying a put. It's a synthetic of buying a put. However, it's much better to buy the put than to sell stock and buy a call, because when you sell a hard-to-borrow stock, there is buy-in risk. And what buy-in risk is that to short a stock, you need to borrow that stock from somebody to sell it. And a lot of times, if it's very hard to borrow, when you borrow that stock from someone to sell it, they're going to call the stock back and say, they might say, okay, you can borrow it today. Okay, you can borrow it tomorrow. Okay, you can borrow it the next day. But then 3 days later, they say, I need that stock back. And you get a call during the middle of the day, and it says you've been bought in on the stock. Now, if you were to do a trade like selling UVXY, selling 100 shares of UVXY, and buying one call and get bought in on the stock, so all of a sudden you are just long a call. You're no longer long a call and short stock. You're just long a call. And thus, it's not the end of the world trading-wise. It's not like you're going to blow out your account. But it's a big risk. And I generally stay away from trading UVXY stock because of the hard-to-borrow issues. If you can find stock, you often have to pay an additional interest rate to short it. And so if you're considering doing a trade like the opposite of a covered call, selling UVXY short and buying one call against it to protect your upside, that you're essentially buying a put. And it comes along with all the same risks of buying a put. When you buy a put, that put is going to decay over time. So the clock is ticking immediately, and you need UVXY to go down in a timely fashion to make money. So what would I offer as a better trade than selling 100 shares of UVXY? So this is a bearish trade, right? If you sell 100 shares of UVXY, UVXY is right now 56.97. So if you sell 100 shares of UVXY and buy a call, you're basically saying, and you buy the 60 call, let's say, you're basically saying, you're basically going to make money any place below the 60 strike, minus however much you pay for the call. So let's say you pay $2 for the 60 call and you sell stock short, then your break-even point is going to be, well, it depends on where you sell the stock, but essentially it's the same risk profile as a put. So below 60, you're going to make money, more and more money as the stock goes lower, and then you're kind of stopped out on your trade. Once it hits 60, you stop losing any money to the upside, and just nothing happens. So what's a better thing than selling stock short and buying the call? Because that trade, like I said, it's got theta decay. It's the call is slowly going to decay, and so if the stock goes, dramatically lower, then that's great. You make money, but your risk is A, you get bought in on the stock, and then you have to go resell it again. B, the trade goes against you. UVXY goes up, and you end up eating the price, whatever you pay for the call. So what I like better is, if you are going to short the stock, I would rather buy a call vertical. Say instead of just buying a call, I would buy a call and sell a much higher strike against it. Now, that doesn't completely protect you to the upside, but it's much more cost effective. Or B, in UVXY, I just like to sell call verticals because I know how much I can make, I know how much I can lose, and nobody can control the narrative by buying in my stock or something like that. I don't want to pull up the actual trade because I want to keep my users anonymous, because I don't know if they want to be named in this video. But essentially, when you sell short anything like UVXY, you're opening up a can of worms, because it's a very hard to borrow stock. You may not be even able to find stock to sell. And it goes from very hard to borrow to not as hard to borrow at times, but in general, it's hard to borrow. And at the worst time, when you need that stock to be short, is the time when they're going to buy you in. So I would be very careful on UVXY selling it short. And I just want to thank everybody for all the questions I've been getting. I love talking about options, and I apologize when I don't answer you promptly. Do not be too worried about this getting assigned on call stuff, because it's generally unlikely. That big box trade, that was one of those situations where you're picking out something that's expiring way in the future, and this person's putting on this big trade, not really knowing what's going on. If you're just buying or selling a put or call vertical, it's very unlikely that you get assigned. And if for some reason you do get assigned, it's probably going to only be on a small percentage of the options that you trade, A, and B, you're probably going to make money if you're assigned, because it would be foolish for somebody to exercise options that aren't exercisable. It's basically giving you free money in most cases, and it's just not going to happen. But in the end, for options trading, you need to understand the risks that you're taking, and generally you're taking more risk when you're selling something than when you're buying something. And as long as you understand the risks, it's perfectly reasonable to trade naked options. You might, if you're selling 100 fat calls that have a big premium to them, like let's say you're selling the 50 call in a stock naked, If you want to protect yourself, you could go ahead and buy like the 70 call that's, a cheap, low price call that's way out of the money, that's only in the doomsday could that actually happen, but you buy those calls to protect yourself, and it works out for you. I see so many retail people nowadays selling these way out of the money calls that could never, that it's very unlikely that they'll ever come in and saying, wow, I'm doing a great deal because I'm selling these calls for 10 cents or something. The real play, as far as I'm concerned, is sell the fat calls for $5 and buy those cheap calls for 10 cents to protect yourself in the event of the worst case scenario. It's called covering your tails, covering your wings. You sell the fat premium, the high priced options, and you buy those way out of the money, either calls or puts, just to protect yourself in the doomsday. Then you can sleep at night. And you're selling something naked, but you're covering it by buying something else way out of the money to protect yourself. And that's how market makers trade stuff. If they've got a lot of risk on, they cover their risk by buying wings in. And like I said, it seems too much these days in retail. People are doing things like they're selling these little teeny wings because they think, oh, it's so unlikely that would ever happen, and they're making money that way. That was the whole blow up with the James Cordier thing, where he sold all these, these really small garbage options, and then eventually, at some point, the unthinkable happened, and he lost everything. It's better to be selling the fat, really expensive premium and buy those wings for protection for a doomsday, and then you're safe. So it's all about managing your risk, folks. Any of these trades are possible. There's nothing wrong with selling naked options at all. We're in the business of taking risks. Hedging yourself 100% against risk is usually going to amount in you not making money. When I short UVXY or VXX, I will hedge the upside sometimes a bit, but I don't overly hedge myself because that just takes away all of your profitability as far as I'm concerned. I want to protect myself from blowing out, of course, and you can always protect yourself with options from blowing out. If you can't protect yourself from blowing out, then you probably shouldn't enter into the trade. But yeah, it's all about managing your risk. If you have questions about your own position, I can definitely put my 2 cents in about it. It's not like a yes or no. It's not like a feelings type answer with this stuff. It's mathematical. You can quantify exactly what your risk is, and everybody's different at what sort of risk level they're willing to stomach. I know that there are some traders that say no trade should be bigger than 0.1% of your account, or 1 or 2% of your account, and I know in Forex a lot of people say that. But it really depends on your own personality, your own risk tolerance, and your own personal style, which you'll have to develop on your own over time. Anyway, I hope this helps a little bit. Is it a good thing that the government is back on the job again, that this stalemate is over for now? I think it's a good thing. How will it affect the markets? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's a good thing that they've come to some sort of agreement. I know there's people on both sides of the fence politically, and I've heard a bunch of different views from people that are all over the place, and I'm going to leave it to others to comment on politics because there's plenty of that out in YouTube, elsewhere. Let's us stick here to trying to figure out how to make money and trying to understand options better. Thanks again for all of your questions. I really appreciate you. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. What it does is it takes $5 out of your whichever way you decide to pay per month, and it helps me keep this channel alive. I currently have like 3 side jobs to keep busy and to help finance everything, but I would love to bring that down to 2 side jobs. If each person watching were to hook me up with $1 or $2, then that would be possible. I'd love to see this channel grow because I love doing these videos, and it's just a great fun time. So help me make my dream come true. Sign up for Patreon, link in the description, and thanks for watching.
Famous Dave, famous Dave, famous Dave, famous Dave, famous Dave.